In a pointed and passionate address that has reignited debate over the direction and relevance of the African Union, EU, Burkina Faso's transitional president, Captain Ibrahim Traore, has called on the continental body to cease what he described as the habitual condemnation of Africans who dare to stand against Western-controlled regimes. His statement has sent shockwaves across the African political landscape and sparked discussions about the EU's role, neutrality, and future. Speaking during a nationally televised ceremony in Ouagadougou marking Burkina Faso's Independence Day from France, Traore directly criticized the African Union for what he calls selective condemnation and a betrayal of Africa's revolutionary spirit. The young leader, who came to power in 2022 amid a wave of anti-French sentiment and disillusionment with Western-backed institutions, delivered a scathing rebuke of what he sees as the EU's failure to side with the true aspirations of African people. The African Union was meant to be the shield of our continent, the voice of our dignity, and the home of our sovereignty, Traore declared. Yet too often, it acts as the spokesperson of those who exploit us. When Africans rise to say enough, when they reject puppet regimes and reclaim their resources, the EU denounces them, not the oppressors. His words drew a standing ovation from government officials, soldiers, and ordinary citizens in attendance, and rapidly echoed across social media platforms, particularly in the Sahel and among Africa's growing youth-led Pan-Africanist movements. Context: EU's history of condemnations. Traore's criticism is rooted in the EU's pattern of responding to political upheaval, especially military-led transitions, with blanket condemnations and suspensions, often in cases where the ousted governments were closely aligned with Western interests. In the past 3 years alone, the EU has suspended Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger following coups that removed Western-aligned leaders. While these military takeovers have drawn criticism for breaching constitutional norms, many Africans see them as popular revolts against corrupt and externally controlled regimes. When soldiers remove a dictator who serves Paris or Washington, the EU calls it unconstitutional, said one Burkinabe analyst. But when those same regimes allow their people to suffer under IMF policies, sell off gold and oil to foreign companies, and ignore the will of the people, the EU says nothing. Traore's remarks strike at the heart of that contradiction, highlighting a growing disconnect between EU elites, many of whom benefit from Western partnerships, and grassroots African movements seeking real change. Traore's call for a new vision of Pan-Africanism. Throughout his speech, Traore repeatedly invoked the legacy of revolutionary African leaders such as Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, and Patrice Lumumba, figures who were once marginalized or opposed by continental institutions, but are now hailed as heroes. These men were once denounced as rebels and threats. Today we call them visionaries, he said. It is time the EU stopped being a club of presidents afraid of losing power, and instead became a house of the people, a guardian of Africa's future. Traore urged the EU to adopt a new framework for legitimacy, one that goes beyond elections and constitutions shaped by colonial-era systems, and instead embraces popular sovereignty, economic independence, and regional cooperation. He proposed that the EU establish a Pan-African Peoples Forum, where youth, traditional leaders, farmers, and workers could directly influence continental decisions, a radical departure from its current government-only structure. EU's response: cautious and defensive. In the hours following Traore's speech, a spokesperson for the African Union Commission responded indirectly, stating that the EU remains committed to constitutional order and inclusive governance, but also recognizes the need for internal reforms and deeper engagement with African citizens. Privately, however, several EU insiders expressed discomfort with Traore's tone, viewing it as an attack on the organization's legitimacy. One EU diplomat, speaking anonymously to an East African news outlet, said, "Captain Traore's remarks may resonate with some, but they risk undermining unity. The EU cannot simply endorse every military takeover as a revolution. There must be standards." Yet critics of the EU argue that its standards appear biased toward protecting the status quo, rather than supporting transformative change. The growing rift between people and institutions. What Traore's speech captured, and what AU leadership may be underestimating, is the deep and widening rift between Africa's ruling elites and its people. Across the continent, young Africans increasingly view the AU as out of touch, overly bureaucratic, and dependent on funding from Europe and the West. In 2023, for example, nearly 60% of the AU's operational budget came from external partners, including the European Union and G20 countries. This dependence has fueled accusations that the AU cannot independently challenge neocolonial policies or economic frameworks that disadvantage African states. How can an organization that is funded by the exploiters defend the exploited? Asked a prominent youth activist from Senegal. Traore is just saying what millions of us already believe. Movements in countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Congo, and Cameroon have begun demanding reforms within the AU, from financial independence to more transparent leadership selection. Traore's speech may now serve as a rallying cry for these efforts. Military governments and popular support, a new political reality. Critics often dismiss military regimes as inherently anti-democratic. However, the governments currently in power in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger enjoy significant popular support, particularly in urban centers and among disenfranchised youth. In Burkina Faso, recent surveys showed over 70% approval for Traore's leadership, largely due to his anti-corruption policies, defense reforms, and rejection of foreign control. In contrast, the civilian governments that preceded him were widely seen as ineffective and corrupt. Traore has also demonstrated a willingness to consult with civil society, student groups, and traditional authorities, a strategy that has earned him praise even from critics of military rule. By calling out the AU's failure to recognize such movements, Traore is demanding that African legitimacy be judged not solely by outdated Western standards, but by the aspirations and needs of African people. Captain Ibrahim Traore's bold denunciation of the African Union's stance toward anti-Western uprisings is more than a critique of one institution. It is a challenge to the entire architecture of post-independence African governance, an architecture that, in his view, has too often prioritized stability over sovereignty, diplomacy over dignity. His words reflect a generational shift. A younger, more assertive Africa is emerging, one that is tired of begging for development aid, tired of tolerating foreign interference, and tired of being told how to govern by those who profited from its colonization.